Indie Mogul has a brand new host, and he is a brand new guest on this podcast. Dave Maze is here. Hey, Dave.
Hello. What's up, Tyler? Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I'm really glad you could come on, and congratulations on your new role and your new job and your new everything. I don't know, what's it been like? How did this happen?
Well, I really can't put any one thing on it. It really just kind of happened by chance and by a strike of luck, I guess. I've been working really hard. If I were to put it into anything, I've been working really hard on my YouTube channel, Kinotika, for the last 3 years, and going to a lot of events, meeting different people. And one of those people was Ted Sim from Indie Mogul. We had lunch about a year ago, and actually, ironically, I got robbed about 4 months ago, and Ted reached out to me, and it kind of struck up we rekindled our friendship from that moment. And honestly, about a month and a half ago, he called me up and was like, "Hey, man, would you like to be a new host on Indie Mogul?" And I was like, "What? What do you mean by that?" And
yeah, and
basically,
for anyone that doesn't know, he's like the nicest dude as well. He's a great guy.
Oh my gosh, Ted is so nice. And if you're not familiar with Ted, yeah, he's also the president of Aperture here in the United States. And he also hosts and is basically the president of Indie Mogul as well. So his hands are full. So he needed a little extra help on the channel. He also wanted to start getting into gear reviews. And that's really what I specialize in. So,
well, and I'm sure there are some people out there that don't know Indie Mogul. Somebody must not know about them. So quick background, who and what is Indie Mogul?
Yeah, sure. Indie Mogul is actually one of the oldest filmmaking YouTube channels on YouTube. It started about 12 years ago. They started making DIY indie filmmaking tips and tutorials, literally back when YouTube was like a thing that you could just hear about and be like, "What's YouTube?" I mean, it's really nuts how old the channel is.
It was just recycled SNL skits.
Yeah, basically, exactly. It was actually purchased by Google when they started kind of buying up some of the big channels. And then after a couple of years, I don't really know the whole history with that world and what was going on then, but Google actually bought a bunch of the big YouTuber channels because they thought maybe they would be their own production studio and produce their own content on YouTube. It ended up not working out. They found out that YouTube is really all about creators creating, not Google making content necessarily. So,
yeah, that's a weird idea to ever.
Yeah, I know. It's a really strange concept, but honestly, nobody knew what this was going to look like. So, you can't neg them for trying, I guess, because I don't even think Netflix was doing streaming at the time. I mean, YouTube kind of was before Netflix streaming. So they were just experimenting. But yeah, Griffin took over after that point, and he kind of controlled the channel for several years, and then the channel kind of went dormant for the last 4 years or so. And then Ted Sim got control of the channel about a year and a half ago, and he totally revitalized the channel, started doing more filmmaker-based content, interviewing DPs, filmmakers, all sorts of great people in the industry here in Hollywood. And now they're branching off, and we're doing gear reviews and gear tutorials with me as the host of that sector of the channel. So it's really taken on many shapes and forms throughout the years. I think like one of our biggest videos is actually a Harry Potter parody song, has 22 million views on it. So like if I tell somebody
it's
like
many things to many people.
Exactly. If I tell people that I'm the host of Indie Mogul, they're like, "Oh, the channel that does Harry Potter parodies?" Is like, no. It's taken on many forms. It's been around for a long time, and I'm really honored to be a part of this legacy now. I think a lot of people remember Indie Mogul who were getting started in the DSLR kind of revolution 7 years ago. Indie Mogul, along with Film Riot, Video Copilot, Freddie Wong, Corridor Digital, that crew of YouTubers, Indie Mogul was totally a part of that same conversation. So it's pretty cool to be a part of that legacy for sure.
Basically, at this point, you are part of internet history. So that's pretty awesome for you.
I guess so.
And the thing that got us talking was that we both did some of the first Red Komodo reviews. Mine just dropped the day of, the day we're recording. I don't know when this will come out, and then yours had come out like almost a week ago. So you got it out yours, I think, was the first full review that I saw, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there were a couple of guys who are filmmakers, DPs who aren't, quote, YouTubers that got a hold of the Red before we did, and did some unboxing and some initial reviews. We were first with the kind of in-depth YouTuber-centric kind of in that format of reviews.
Yeah, right. All the features, all the tests.
Exactly. Within, our very limited restrictions here, we didn't do any scientific tests by any means, but we did do autofocus tests and low light tests and dynamic range and all that kind of stuff. And we posted our video at the same time as Marquez, so we were able to kind of ride that wave with MKBHD posting his first impressions video, which was more of an overview, and he has a lot of experience in the Red ecosystem, but ours went into a lot of the nitty-gritty details, at least the things that fascinate me and made me most excited about the camera. And you and I have been talking about this on Twitter for a while, so I'm excited to be here and to discuss it more. I loved your video, by the way. I just watched it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and also with Marquez's video as well, he's creating them mostly for people that he knows won't buy it and aren't even interested in buying this camera. There's a lot of people that just watch. It's sort of like his Dope Tech series, where it's like, this is just cool.
Yeah,
you're gonna like this, but you don't need it. Whereas, you and I are talking to an audience that, either may purchase it or it's in the realm of something they may consider for the future. So.
Yeah, or at least rent it. That's what we actually did. We rented ours off of ShareGrid. It was about $200 a day here in LA.
I was wondering. Crazy. Okay.
Yeah, that's how we got a hold of it. So here in LA, there's actually 4 or 5 guys already renting it out on ShareGrid, which if you're one of the early adopters of this camera, I think it's a pretty clever thing to do. You might be able to pay it off in a couple months. Honestly, a lot of people want to play with it. So
at the start. Yeah, especially right at the beginning. It's funny, actually, I tried doing ShareGrid last time I was in LA, and I couldn't make the insurance work for me as a Canadian. Like, whatever it is they required, I just I couldn't get it working, and so I couldn't use it. I don't. Maybe if there's a way to do it, somebody tell me, because I don't know if I'm ever in the States again. I'd love to be able to use it. It's an amazing service. I really love what they do, but
yeah, it really is.
I got to get it set up. So. And then, for me, it was total coincidence. I wasn't planning to do this video, but I arrived and I messaged a friend. I only, because it was in Amsterdam, and I only have a couple friends there, and I messaged both of them, and one of them was like, "Hey, I've got a red Komodo showing up tomorrow. Do you want to play with it?" I'm like,
"Wow,
I have the perfect project for us." So we went out and shot and did a video together. So
on the boat, social distancing from everybody. It was really great.
Yeah, exactly.
Well done.
Yeah, all very outdoors, and we shot a bunch more too. That I'm thinking I will do a second video as well. So. Should be good, but it's very fun to play with. So, I think let's up front, let's do a bit of a deep dive on the Komodo later, but let's up front get through some more surface level, just sort of some news and things going on, because there's been a lot. I've heard a lot of people say that usually the summer is the slow time for news, especially in tech. Stuff just stops coming out for a while, and all the podcasts need to do filler. And this has been nonstop. There's so much news that I've started talking about news on this show, which I try not to do, but I feel like I kind of can't help it anymore, because some of it's just coming so fast, and it's really affecting creators. It's part of our world, and if you make things and need to buy cameras, especially to do that, you got to consider this stuff right now. So it's all been pretty fast moving, and I don't know. I feel like we should cover a few of them anyway.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's a ton of crazy news going on in the Apple and Google world with Unreal or not Unreal,
oh my God.
Epic.
Yeah, it is Unreal though. But
and TikTok, all sorts of crazy things going on right now.
Oh, it's too much. And this show isn't current enough to update things on the latest. But at the end of the last show, we did briefly mention the Epic Apple situation. And again, like I said, this show isn't super timely. So the things I want to say about it hopefully will age beyond the news cycle, because who knows who's going to have won what lawsuit and who's going to come out on top and all this.
Yeah.
The 2 cents that I want to get in about it, just the thought I want to get out there now that I've been able to dive a little deeper into the news story, is that everybody is wrong in this situation. I think both parties are approaching this poorly. First of all, Epic, it feels like Epic is trying to piggyback on top of a legitimate problem in the App Store, which recently the big news, a month ago was with Hey, which is a email service provider that had a very legitimate email service that had an app that it was only functional if you bought the service. And then Apple said like, okay, well, you can't put it in the App Store if you don't have some kind of free use case. So they basically kind of got kicked out of the App Store when they didn't deserve to. And that was pretty unreasonable. A lot of people were, I think the correct side was to criticize Apple for it and say like, look, you got to do better. And you got to, if you're going to be the emperor of your closed walled garden, then you need to, be beneficent, and you need to make us all feel like you have our best interests in mind. And this was a case where it felt like Apple didn't have developers or users' best interest in mind. So now, a few weeks later, what I see Epic doing is they're like, look, here's a moment where people are mad at Apple about the App Store. Let's jump on this and try to look like the same kind of victim.
They had their own video made and everything. They like animated a full commercial. They were ready to go. It was really clever.
They executed it well.
Yeah.
And it's playing on loop in Fortnite as well. They did. I mean, they got their message out there effectively, but it was sort of too perfect to me. It was like they were piggybacking on top of a legitimate story of legitimate grievances of a smaller developer and saying, well, poor us, we intentionally broke Apple's rules and put paid services inside of the App Store that we know are not, like, no questions asked. What they did was not allowed and intentionally not allowed. Like they were provoking Apple. And then they act like it's Apple's fault that Fortnite was pulled from the App Store. And that is just an unreasonable perspective of what happened. Whether they might have a legitimate cause for grievances, and maybe it's even a legitimate lawsuit. Like maybe they'll win. And if they do, it's Apple's fault for having made them angry, like for having made so many developers feel so dissatisfied that they would be in this situation at all.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know. That's my take on it. I feel like Apple is doing wrong by some developers, and it's spilling out into this bigger relationship issue where they're making all of their many developers upset. And then Epic is exploiting it. This episode of the Stalman Podcast is brought to you by the new season of Wireframe, a podcast all about how UX can help technology fit into our lives. Wireframe is a show for designers and the design curious, hosted by Koi Vin, Senior Director of Design at Adobe. The pandemic has changed our habits and our lives, and this season of Wireframe leans into how design interacts with these changes. So you'll listen to stories like how user experience design helps people manage stress and sleeplessness, or find something good to watch on an online streaming service, and even help individual creators and social causes through crowdfunding. And this is a good one too, how you can help older family members understand technology. And now that I've listened to a few episodes from this season, I gotta say my favorite was still the one about helping older people understand their technology, because I could just relate to it so much. But the most recent one was also a great listen, and it's about how user interfaces in our video streaming services really affect how we watch, because it touches on all these points that I used to think a lot about when I was a user interface designer, and how people don't even understand necessarily like how you're trying to subtly manipulate them, but not necessarily in a bad way, but it has an effect on their actual behavior. And that interaction between the designer and user is really fascinating to me. You'll hear from some seriously impressive design leaders who have brought UX and UI experiences to companies like Headspace, Patreon, Kickstarter, and With Things. Why Things? I always forget how that company's pronounced. Whether you're into UX, UI, technology, or just curious about the way that design affects our everyday lives, I think you should go check out the show. Just search for Wireframe in your favorite podcast app, like the one that you're using right now, or just check out the link in the show notes. Thanks again to Wireframe for their support of this show.
I was just listening to Renee Ritchie talk about this on John Gruber's show, and he was talking about how Epic basically wants to just create their own app store and have their own ecosystem just like Apple. So at the end of the day, it's not like they're not trying to fight this battle for developers. They're just trying to have their own store on the App Store so that they can charge people 13% or whatever. So I mean, they're not this valiant like superhero that we can, wish that, they're going to win because they're the good guys. It's kind of a gray area right now where we've got these two massive companies fighting each other, and there's good and bad sides to both, I think, in a lot of respects. So we'll have to see how it goes.
It's definitely entertainment, but it's like professional wrestling and tech news because they are such big companies, right? It's hard to feel like I can't feel that bad for Epic because they are huge. Even Apple is much huger, but Epic is prepared to fight a real battle. They have a budget for lawyers.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think I haven't looked at I'm sure reading like Reddit threads, I would see more of how much are Fortnite players taking what side here. I'm a little worried, and I haven't looked, but I'm a little worried there probably is somewhat of a response that's just totally backing Epic and saying, like, I can't believe Apple would do this. Apple is against its users. And it just sort of is like buying into propaganda a little bit. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Fortnite has a lot of teenage fans, so I'm sure, and apparently...
And that's maybe just who I'm speaking to. It's like, I think just if there's anybody listening that, feels like this is clearly one-sided, it's just not. It is a complicated issue. And like I say, both sides are wrong.
I will say I tried to explain all this to my wife, and she was like, huh? I don't care.
Yeah.
So, well, all of us...
I even have a little bit of a feeling of that. I'm like, it feels a little contrived.
Yeah.
It's like... they're trying to make a news story. So the thing is, this will have big effects. This is why we have to talk about it, even though it is contrived, is because this will change something important.
Yeah.
Relatively soon. We don't know what it is. If it's lawmakers coming in and passing regulations that affect how all apps are used, it could have some really negative effects if it kind of goes in the wrong direction. Like I don't want a situation where the rules are coming from the top down, from government down to private corporations, because I just think government doesn't understand this stuff well enough to make good laws about it, right? So I would rather see this pressure lead Apple to make the right decisions themselves. And I don't think those decisions are most of all about giving a bigger, like the revenue share to developers. That doesn't seem like the most important thing to me. It's much more about, if a few people have made this point repeatedly. I think John Siracusa has been most clear spoken about it, but that, if Apple is if their whole point is that they want to ensure that the quality of apps on the App Store is always high, then they need to follow through with that in all of their decisions, not just when it has monetary interest for them.
That's really good.
Because there are lots of bad apps on the store. Yeah, there's tons of spam and crap out there.
Totally.
That Apple's making money off of, and they're not stopping that. Yeah, so
a lot of fart apps and
Oh, you're saying those ones are bad too?
I demand that all fart apps leave the App Store immediately.
Okay, there's a few other things. So one that was exciting, actually, I should have led with this. It's way more interesting. Is and it's small, so we probably don't have that much to say about it. But news about Canon. Oh, where was I on this last week? I don't remember how far along it was. I mean, I'm pretty sure we had already talked about that the overheating appears to be a timer.
Yep.
And then there's been other updates since that, like putting a piece of tape over a sensor in your battery compartment will override the timer.
Yeah. Andrew Reed from EOS HD continues to find new things about this overheating pandemic, if you will. I think the most recent thing that he's posted on EOS HD shows if you take a little screw and screw it into the battery slot, it can kind of disable the timer in the camera, apparently. Wow. I think, honestly, Canon has a lot to say right now. They're being quiet. They really need to have some sort of response here because they're being accused of potentially lying to their customers, which is a pretty serious thing. So
Yeah, for sure.
We've kind of known for a while that Canon disables things intentionally to protect their cinema camera lineup. And that couldn't be more kind of obvious if you come from that perspective when you look at what's going on with this overheating. There's a lot of Canon diehards out there who still are saying, no, I'm going to trust that, this thing overheats. I've talked to actually camera engineers about this, and they've told me there is overheating that can happen on the sensor that isn't being read from an internal temperature control. You really need to get the temperature of the sensor, the autofocus system. There's much more to it than what we've seen so far in terms of reading just off of the XF data. So as of right now, we're still not getting a full picture of everything. Apparently there is a Chinese engineer that I think took apart the camera and actually did some of this real extreme testing. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, in a couple months, some genius out there figures out some really goofy hack that involves taking apart your camera, maybe buying some sort of DIY kit, and then doing this yourself and hacking it. But don't do it, right?
The thing is like, if you're going to use this camera for any kind of work, it has to support those features natively. Like you can't hack it and then expect it to be a professional piece of kit. Like, you're still spending a ton of money on this thing. And, I feel like, watching Andrew, if anybody hasn't read the EOS HD stuff, it's great that Andrew's doing this work, but his personality is very angry, like, in general.
He's a troll.
Yeah.
Do you know Andrew? Have you ever met him?
No, I don't know him personally at all. I just see a lot of very negative tweets flying all the time.
I've met him. We had dinner together. We had drinks. We actually hung out for 2 or 3 days in Germany. So I would actually call him a friend. We actually DM each other constantly about all this stuff. I don't I do share his stories. I come at it from the angle of everybody kind of hates the guy. I can just tell you from meeting him, he has the most British, dry sense of humor that you could ever imagine. So it's a character that he's playing, honestly.
I'm not so much saying that he's like that. I'm not saying this to say that he's a bad guy, but I'm saying that a lot of what he's writing about it has some conclusions that are very, it's like the same way that Epic is approaching Apple. It's like, look, it's time for us to sue Canon to hell and drive them out of business because they have screwed their customers.
Totally.
And I've been seeing that is filtering through to normal photographers. Like, people I talk to that aren't in the media are getting that sense of like, oh, did you hear the Canon is intentionally doing X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, I don't think that's a healthy relationship for any of us to have with the companies that we are so directly, using their stuff. It's like, I do think Canon will intentionally handicap their products, but it's not to jump to the assumption that it's like, no, their engineers don't understand how cooling works. That's just wrong. Like, they clearly have experts that really do understand the stuff and wanted this to be a very good product and made some, I think, it's almost more like PR or marketing mistakes by saying what it could do. And then the way that those features came out, like, there's huge mistakes. Canon is absolutely screwing up here. I'm not saying that they are innocent of this. It's just that, don't just, I don't know. It's like, this story needs time to be for the truth to come out.
There's no conclusive evidence either way, really. We don't know for sure if it's intentional or not. It seems like that's the case, but to make a statement and say that it is would be incorrect. So I totally agree with that. But it is interesting for sure.
Yeah. Oh, it's very interesting. The other things that have happened lately, other updates are there's new firmware, which I think wasn't that exciting, relatively small, but they did officially announce that C-Log 3 would be coming to both the 1DX3 and to the R5. So that's one of those things that I was saying was really important to eventually happen. So I'm glad to see that it is.
That update actually reminded me of the 1DX Mark III. I was like, oh yeah, that camera actually doesn't overheat. Like, if you want,
still an amazing camera.
Yeah, if you want something that has the Canon look, that's got the amazing autofocus, maybe we should be reconsidering that camera too. I mean, it's I don't know.
My problem with that camera is always the physical shape of it. I dislike that in principle for shooting with, but feature wise and quality wise, it's pretty great.
I wish I had a little flip screen on it. That'd be great. But
the other feature was lower bit rates. So that is a great one. And I think including in RAW, so RAW 6K, is it RAW 6K? Yes, it has to be. That there will be a lower bitrate mode. That was one of the things they said would be coming. It's not in it's not the firmware update that just came out. This is the announcing that is coming and
in the
C-Log
future.
3.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Canon
both of those
Log 3.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having expanded dynamic range from one of the better log formats, still not C-Log 2, which is really what I was hoping we'd hear. But that's great. And then also the file sizes are stupid big. It's unreasonable how big they are. Like looking at the Blackmagic 12K, which only shoots 12K RAW. I think there's, I don't remember, maybe there's some other things on it. But anyway, when you're shooting RAW, you can only shoot 12K. Those files are much smaller, like significantly smaller than the 8K RAW out of the Canon. Yeah, way smaller, which is like the format Canon goes with on their big, same with 4K on my 5D. The file size is stupid. Like they don't worry about it. They're just like, oh sure, we'll just make it as big as possible. Who cares?
Are you talking about your 5D Mark IV with the motion JPEG codec? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I had the 1DC for years. That's what I shot on, and it had the same codec. I had to convert everything to ProRes just to use it.
Yeah, I just don't use it. It was it was stupid. Like I didn't use it in 4K. I only shot 1080 on it because it was just crazy. Like it was way too much. It was impossible.
Yeah, I think honestly, I did a bunch of research on Red recently because I'm going to be doing an interview after this interview with Ted Sim, my co-host with Indie Mogul, about the history of Red. And interestingly, Red actually owns a lot of the really important patents on raw video. And to this day, they still have been able to maintain that. And Apple actually has to pay a licensing fee to Red to use ProRes RAW, which has become pretty well known with the Atomos recorders and all sorts of different cameras. But Blackmagic got around this by creating their own RAW codec with B-RAW, and I would assume that Canon also did the same with their own RAW codec. The problem with that is Red's compression is so good that you can actually shoot RAW 8K on a Red camera, and like you're saying, I mean, the file sizes are just a fraction of what you're going to get on the R5 with the RAW. Obviously, the image quality is going to be great, but I've heard it's like a 256 gig card gives you 8 minutes of RAW or something.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Well, and frustratingly, it's still going to be less dynamic range. Like the files are bigger, but they won't look better in any way than for that file size. Like you are gaining nothing. You're just using up your memory cards faster. So
I'm really I've seen a couple of photographers get their R5s and they seem to really love it, but it's almost like if I see anybody with an R5, it's and they're serious about it and they're actually using it as a video tool, I'm like, how? Why?
I'm really thinking about doing a photography only review of the R5 at some point, because I don't know, these cameras really do look perfect for photography. So there are a lot of distractions for photographers if they look up reviews right now because of the video features, but they really fixed all the most important things. I really like what they're doing.
That's great.
So I think if you are a photographer, don't worry about it. These cameras are amazing in pretty much every way. I don't see any problems. It's everything we hoped for.
The problem is Canon marketed it as an 8K capable video camera, and here we are. So that's the main problem.
There's one more a comment that stuck in the back of my head in one of my R6 videos is they were like, the problem isn't Canon, the problem is all these YouTubers complaining about the video features. So just for fun, I just Googled Canon R6, and the official Canon website, the first line of text in Google before I even click through, is 8K video. It's the headline feature from Canon. They are pushing this.
The R5, yeah.
Yeah, but that was about the R6, but for both
the
of
R6
them,
does 8K too?
No, sorry. then I said it wrong. But it meant it's pushing the video features in the very top headline of it. Like, this is coming from Canon. It's not just YouTubers.
And Sony's over here like twiddling their thumbs like, we got something that actually works.
Yeah. No, I mean,
over here.
Yeah, I got nothing to complain about with Sony. So I don't know. Maybe that'll be how we end the show, is like, how do I decide between all these cameras? Because we still got to talk about that red too. But there's one more update I want to hit before that, and that is there's a new update to Final Cut Pro. And
yes,
it's got some pretty nice stuff in it. One thing is that there is now metal optimization for, this is like a different show right now. We're just doing like all the video news in the world, that's fine. I don't know. I guess.
Well, sorry. I think it's my fault, Tyler. I'm sorry.
But I'm really into there's a lot. It's really interesting. Okay, we'll do this one really quick because it's very newsy. It's just like a point update for Final Cut.
Yeah, it's still not September yet, so we don't have phones yet. Right. So we're almost there. So we got to get all this out before the phones come out.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things, metal optimization. So when you're transcoding RAW, they were listing it as either ProRes RAW or R3D Red RAW files. It will be up to 3 times faster on a MacBook Pro with the same hardware, just because it uses metal optimization. So that's amazing.
I wonder if that's going to also carry over to the Afterburner card. Did they mention anything about the Afterburner?
Yes, they said for the Mac Pro it'd be 2 times faster. They didn't mention the Afterburner in it. They just said the Mac Pro.
I'm curious to see how Apple utilizes that Afterburner card. As a Final Cut editor, that's really just interesting to me. I don't own one. I've got a maxed out 16-inch, which I've really loved using. So this new update's going to be great for me. One of the things that stood out as well with this new update to Final Cut is the implementation of having ISO and white balance control, I think.
Oh, yes.
In ProRes RAW. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you do white balance as well?
Yeah. I think they're all there. It's got all the basics now. But I think not in Canon RAW Lite, which is my RAW, so poor me.
Yeah. And does Canon do ProRes RAW out of like the C200? Are they ever going to do that, you think? Or
no. I feel like because they like their thing. They put all this work into Canon RAW Lite, so they want to show it off. They want to use it. But I would much rather
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd rather be ProRes if it could be, but I don't think they're going to do it. And unfortunately, that means they're behind in support. So I still need to go through DaVinci Resolve to do all of my sort of transcoding and transform. I do the log transform in Resolve as well. So this episode of the Stalman Podcast is brought to you by the Intrazone by Microsoft SharePoint. We all know the feeling of finding a great new podcast. I know I'm always on the lookout for them. If you're looking for a new show to listen to, the Intrazone is a bi-weekly podcast with conversations and interviews on how Microsoft SharePoint, OneDrive, and related tech can work for you. You'll hear from guest experts behind the scenes and in the field, so you can see how SharePoint fits into your everyday work life to easily share and manage content, knowledge, and applications. Each show covers a bunch of segments like news and announcements, a focused topic of the week, guest perspectives, FAQs of the week, and upcoming events. And just so you know what to expect, I want to tell you about some of the topics that you might be interested in that were on some previous episodes. They've discussed working from home, which I know is relevant to some of you. Also, figuring out intelligent intranet for your organization. And they did an episode talking about API and teamwork too, which you should give a try. One of the recent episodes was an interview with a cloud developer, and I just got to say it's so great when huge companies like Microsoft use podcasts to create this direct relationship with the people that depend on their products and use them most, so that you don't feel that disconnection that can come from, big faceless companies. You're hearing directly from people that know what's going on and use the product extensively. So go and listen to a show now. Just search for Intrazone wherever you get your podcast. That's INTRAZONE, or just click the link in the show notes. So go and check it out. Our thanks to the Intrazone from Microsoft SharePoint for their support of this show. Okay, the other very important thing about the Final Cut update, proxies have been massively updated.
Yes.
And this really matters because before there was only one proxy setting. You just say generate proxies and it would make pretty big files. They're like ProRes LT and only half of whatever resolution you're shooting at. So if you're shooting 4K, it's still making 1080 proxy files, which are not in ProRes LT. They're not that small. You can't just zip them up and shoot them over to somebody easily, which you can do if you change the format to, MP4s or H.264 and make them 720, which sometimes or for me, a lot of the time, that's the workflow I need because I'm sending the files quickly. Like I need this to happen right away. So now you can set the resolution to pretty much anything. I think 12% was the lowest size, which is tiny.
That's great.
Yeah, and choose different file formats.
I mean, we're entering the world of 12K video now, so that's wwonderful.
Yeah, so it will be very necessary. And I mean, a lot of us edit on our laptops, and even with your, maxed out or your very nice 16-inch MacBook Pro, it's going to struggle eventually. Do you do proxy workflows on it now, or?
I don't. When I started working here at Indie Mogul about 2 weeks ago, I came to find out that they operate a full proxy workflow here. They ingest all of their footage and have a dedicated machine that, as we're just going about our business, it's constantly making proxies of everything. And then all the editors edit off of that. That's just to speed everything up with our server and what we have here. Also, the editors are working on 2015 MacBook Pros with Adobe Premiere. So it's been a necessity for them to work in a proxy workflow. So hopefully we will start to upgrade those machines and we'll be able to crank out a little bit faster. I used to do only proxy because I edited for about 2 years on a MacBook Air as a freelancer. Yeah. I don't know why I forced myself to do that, but I downgraded from a MacBook Pro to a MacBook Air just because I wanted the smaller size and the better battery life. Mm-hmm. And because I was on Final Cut and most of the time I was editing in 1080p, I could, yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't even have to convert my DSLR footage. I was just editing native, in Final Cut on a MacBook Air for years. And then I was working with my 1DC full time as a freelancer on my MacBook Air. I just would convert everything to proxy overnight and then I'd be able to crank out the edit. It was a fine workflow. It's just not conducive for a YouTuber lifestyle at all. So now I kind of need the most maximum whatever so that I could just dump it in, go native, and just export. I don't do proxies anymore just for speed purposes.
Yeah, you need to be in a certain situation to make proxies work. It's not viable for everyone, for sure.
Yeah, but this is great. I'm glad that they've implemented this because there's a lot of editing houses, post-production houses that need a better proxy solution than just a check mark. So this is great. And it's also, I guess, creating the footsteps towards Apple Silicon as well. I would imagine there's some under the hood stuff going on that maybe we are not aware of.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Everything they've been doing around Final Cut, and I've mentioned a few times, like getting rid of DNX HD support, or all the DNX formats and many of the other big formats. That's totally just so they can do Apple Silicon. So let's get to the Red Komodo because that's the most exciting thing. So
Can I say up front? Yeah. I got a lot of comments from people who watch my video that said that it sounded like I said Red Kimono, like the outfit, So I want to just clarify. I promise I said Komodo.
I'm gonna watch it again.
I said it so quickly and so fast that it just kind of rolled off the tongue.
Soft D.
Red Komodo. It was a soft D. So I am aware it is a Red Komodo, but I guess I should have worn a kimono and it would have been a little bit more entertaining.
That's right. The amount of times I misspeak or have typos in videos, I get called out on it too. It happens all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, here we are, Red Komodo.
So this Red Kimono, it's pretty great. Okay, yeah. So let's start by just let's talk about what it is a little bit, what we like about it, and then at the end, I'm really thinking about getting this camera, and I don't know if it's a terrible idea. So okay, we'll get to that at the end. What is it?
Well, the Red Komodo is a 6K resolution box that can fit in the palm of your hands. It's very small and compact for a Red. It's got a global shutter sensor inside of it, which is a first from Red as well. In fact, it's one of the few global shutter cameras right now on the market at all. There was a trend with some of the earlier cinema cameras to have global shutters. The F35 from Sony had one. I think the F55 from Sony had one. Blackmagic made a version of it. The Arri Alexa, honestly, a lot of people don't realize this, but the Arri Alexa does not have a global shutter.
Rolling. So all these, every movie we're seeing right now is rolling shutter.
Exactly. So this is really important. Now the millisecond, refresh time on an Alexa is really good. It's like 3 milliseconds, which virtually is global for, but when you're doing VFX work, you're doing a lot of whipping and panning and stuff. VFX artists do not want to deal with rolling shutter, because essentially what happens when you have a rolling shutter issue and the camera's whipping back and forth,
Well,
the CGI and the computer graphics, they actually have to fake rolling shutter in their animations to match the camera's issues. Well, so by simply having a global shutter, that solves that issue. That will actually help a lot of people's workflow in Hollywood when it comes to CGI and things like that. So using this type of camera for crash cams is what Red is kind of promoting this as. Mm-hmm. This is the perfect crash cam for Hollywood. It's a perfect gimbal op, shoulder cam kind of setup. That's what they're marketing it as. But as you said in your video, and as I've come to find out in my review, I feel like this is actually a great camera for content creators. And so, yeah, I don't know if you want to go from there, but
yeah, I mean, I was saying, and I think this is true, this is going to be the next round of what the Alexa Mini turned out to be, because nobody thought the Alexa Mini was supposed to be that version of the Alexa. It's like, oh yeah, this is just what we'll put on gimbals, and it'll be easier to sort of tear down if you need more portable work, or just stick it on a drone, or it's the Mini, it's the small one for specific situations. They did not expect this to be what everyone uses for everything. And the Mini is more than twice the size of the Red Komodo. It's massive in comparison. It's way bigger and way more expensive too.
Way more expensive. Yeah, I think a lens mount cost as much as this camera.
Totally.
The RE,
so now we have like this. This is why this is an important camera. It's all of a sudden something is in like the prosumer price range, but is really what top Hollywood films are being shot on. I mean, there are so many more movies that are shot on Alexa than on Red, but not so much because Red is bad. It's more of a preference.
Yeah, it's like different film stocks back in the day. They each have their own characteristics, to each other. So.
But you could fit this into any, like the things you just pick up and shoot with this. Your lens won't be as nice, but other than that, if you're let's say you're shooting on a really clean Sigma, Sigma 3514, that could fit in. That'd be great VFX footage that could be used for anything, because it's a spherical lens, so it's going to be really easy for artists to work with, and it's going to be crazy sharp, and you're going to just have no problems with it.
But you can also put a PL lens on it too if you really wanted to.
No, totally. That's what. So Frank, my friend that's in the video, whose camera it is, he's mostly got PL, so he hasn't picked up that mount yet. But he got all the adapters, so we were playing with the Canon one, and what I really liked was the Leica adapter, because those lenses feel so good on there. We went to the Leica store after to just try a few.
Like
of them
a Leica M.
Yeah,
lens?
Exactly. The Leica M lenses.
Ooh,
those
are tiny small, and perfect.
And they have a very short flange distance. So the Leica M adapter is about half the size of the Canon one. It's very small. And then the lenses are less than half the size of the Canon lenses, and they're better. So it's amazing.
They are. Yeah, Leica engineering. I love it. Both my Leicas were stolen in the robbery. I'm so pissed.
Oh, I'm so
I had
sorry.
an M3. But yeah, I mean, it's really quite impressive what Red has done here. I've been waiting for this camera ever since Jared kind of started teasing everybody with it. Now, before we get into the details here, I do want to say there's a lot of people that are a little confused with this who maybe aren't familiar with Red. Yes, there's a Blackmagic 6K that's like $2,000, and it looks really good too. It's way cheaper. It's way more practical for most people. You've got other camera manufacturers out there as well doing things very similar, like Zcam doing a small box, small form factor.
Which are great. Like, to say good things about the Red is not dissing these cheaper cameras. It's not saying bad things about these other cameras.
Exactly. But a lot of people are not aware of this just because they're not in this world. And I'm not one of these people either. Now that I live here in LA and I'm around Hollywood, I'm starting to realize that Red logo attached to the camera means a lot in Hollywood. Like, it means way more than you would ever imagine. It truly does. So just having the reliability and the ecosystem that Hollywood film studios are used to working with R3D post-production houses who've been working with R3D raw codecs for years now, it's going to implement perfectly into that. So that's why, you know, we say $6,000 is a cheap red. Well, $6,000 is not cheap for a camera. I mean, you can buy an M50 for $400 that, you know, can get you by, right? Like, it's not, you can't compare those two things. But in the Hollywood world, this is quite revolutionary. But I think what's really interesting is it's the perfect like MKBHD camera, like for the aspiring tech high-end YouTuber audience too. It's gonna pull into that world as well, which is really exciting, I think.
I think a lot of YouTubers are going to buy the Switch. I mean, you know, I think there are some other cameras that make more sense for just YouTube. Like, there's so many good options right now. I mean, you know, the C300 Mark III and the C500 and the what's the Sony, the 9X,
the FX9 or the FX, or is it FX7?
No, that was it. That was it. FX9.
Yeah, and then obviously you got the hybrids like the EOS R and the A7 III and the A7S III. So where those cameras still exist, they're still amazing cameras.
but okay, wait. I still wanted to circle back because I feel like when we were talking about global shutter, there was still a little more to say about it. First of all, just to define rolling shutter for the few people that may not know. I mean, most cameras operate in a way that the sensor reads out pixels in a sequence. You know, I don't know. I'm assuming it's top to bottom, left to right, or something like that, where each pixel is read after the other one.
Yes, top to bottom.
So that there is a tiny delay as everything is read out, and that's why you'll see warping from one side to the other of the frame as you move the camera quickly. And so the thing that global shutter means is that it returns us to the days of shooting on film, shooting films on film, because in that case, it's always a global shutter. The whole image is you know, being exposed as the shutter like moves past it. So you would never have that distortion. So you know, in a way, it's like we just finally got back to the place we were in terms of but it's funny because it's actually it's always referred to as a global shutter, but which I assume is because that, you know, in a film context, it is the shutter that is important, but it's actually it's like a global sensor. It's the sensor that is the different thing, right?
Yes. Correct.
Yeah. I mean, it's not
basically
the shutter
every frame of video is being captured entirely within that split second that the image is exposed on the sensor. Whereas on a rolling shutter sensor, it's only millisecond delay. It's you cannot see it by the naked eye, but once you start moving the camera quickly, if you've ever shot iPhone video out of your window in a driving, you know, moving vehicle, you can see how, you know, if there's like a telephone pole, the bottom of it is further along the image than the top. It's totally slanted. Again, these are things that we've kind of gotten used to over the years because we see it so much. We see it in our iPhone footage. We even see it in movies and television.
Those crazy warped propeller, like you sit in a prop plane and look out the window and watch the propeller spin. It looks insane.
It looks insane. But this is going to be a huge, like, I think it's one of the things people are really overlooking about this camera when they start comparing it to Blackmagic and other companies. It's like, this global sensor is worth a little bit extra. Like, I would pay more to have it because it has what you would call a motion cadence to the image and a cinematic feel to the movement of the camera. You can actually hand hold the camera, and even though you're being a little shaky with it, it just has a good feel to it for some reason. And that's because there's no warping or weird jello effects going on with it. It's really amazing. And like you mentioned in your video, adding post-stabilization to it can help. Obviously, motion blur will still be there. So if you're shooting at 180 degrees shutter angle and you whip the camera around a little bit and you stabilize it, any blur in the image will still be there. So it's recommended if you're going to do stabilization in post to crank your shutter speed up so that your image is a little sharper. So I'm getting into the weeds there. But overall, this global shutter is awesome.
I had one example where I was just stabilizing like normal handheld footage, and that looked basically perfect. And then I also did one where I intentionally shook the camera and vibrated it, and that doesn't. That looks bad because you can see the motion blur. Like the image is still, but suddenly everything's blurry for a second. So you couldn't work with that. But it was great on the handheld stuff because I don't stabilize anything from the Canons that I shoot with ever. It's too warpy. Like it never works. It always looks bad. So I never use it. So I was really glad to see that it looked pretty good on there.
And putting this thing on, I didn't have enough time with it to put it on like a Ronin, for example, a Ronin S.
Oh, we did.
But oh yeah, how did that look on a gimbal?
Okay, so I think it would have been nice if we had set it up a little differently, and the challenges of the setup slowed us down a little. So we had an external battery, and probably our biggest issue was that the cable, like at the back of the camera, there's I guess it's a P-tap cable that is going down to an external battery that we had. That would have been fine, except the cable would bump against the back of the Ronin, and we could have fixed that too, except that the lens was a bit too heavy to balance it in that way. So either if we had a lighter, actually, really, it's a lighter lens. That's what we need, because the camera just needed to be forward of what we were doing. And wait, what lens did? I'm trying to even remember what the lens was.
Or if you were, maybe you were on a bigger gimbal like a Movi Pro with batteries on the camera itself.
But I've seen these mounted on the Ronin doing totally fine. So honestly, it's just get a small short lens. I can't remember what was on there. I just don't remember what our lens was that day.
A Tokina 11 to 16 would be perfect on there.
For sure. Opinion. Or there's the Canon Pancakes, the Pancake 24, which is an EFS lens. It's like $100 and some odd and would look great. I'm definitely going to pick one of those up. And then there's also the 17 to 55 Canon 2.8, which is also stabilized, which is kind of nice, but it's relatively light, relatively inexpensive, and very sharp. So there's a few options out there. Anyway, so get one of the smaller lenses. That was our biggest problem.
Put some Leica lenses on it.
No, exactly. But then when it worked, which it did work, we were able to get shots and stuff, which it was just kind of bumping occasionally. It was pretty amazing. We were using the iPhone as the monitor the whole day, so everything was wireless. There's no
really,
yeah, everything. Wow. The monitoring was all wireless, and it totally worked. We had a hard time, and we were testing autofocus quite a bit too, and it would often. It's sort of like it was mostly working, like it would focus and then basically sort of stay on the subject. But because I'm used to tracking autofocus, I would forget that like the Ronin has to stay in exactly the same position. And if that tracking point falls off your subject, now it's not tracking and now it goes to the background. So that ruined a lot of shots. And that, we might have gotten used to that if we had a little more time, but I don't know. It's how did you find the autofocus anyway?
The autofocus is really promising. It's a phase detect autofocus system, so it's similar to what all the best autofocus cameras have. I mean, Sony has a phase detect. Canon is a variant of that with their dual pixel autofocus system. Basically, it's not Panasonic, so that's all that matters. And it's not bad. I mean, I did some tests with it here in the studio with good lighting, and within its limitations, like you said, it's not a tracking autofocus system. You can't have continuous if the subject stays where the box is located. It's good, and it's in beta, so it'd be cool if they actually had tracking, like a face tracking, but Jared from Red has again said, like, this is very beta. We have zero experience with this. Bear with us. We're working on it. It is what it is. But, he's been really upfront about that. And even with that being said, I think it's a great first start for Red. I'm actually really impressed.
A comment that was in Marquez's video that I heard echoed in my comments was that, don't buy this camera for something that you want it to be in the future. But I'd actually say that those features, especially there's a lot of people that are thinking about that in terms of autofocus. The way the autofocus is still very useful, though. If you're doing a single person YouTube video, what it means is that you could just sit down for your talking head, use your iPhone, touch your face, and now you're in focus. Like, as long as you're not moving a lot or coming in and out of frame, if you're just doing normal A-roll, I think you could trust it. I think it would work for a whole video from what I saw.
Totally. And that's the only use case that I really have is just talking head in a fairly controlled environment. So, you're not going to be able to rely on it on a gimbal with like a ton of moving subjects and, shooting a wedding per se, but you can still make it work. I mean, you and I got started in this world with no autofocus whatsoever. So, I mean, you can always fall back on manual.
Yeah.
But,
totally.
the fact that it's there and that it is working, it's not doing the crazy pulsating effects that you see with a contrast-based autofocus system. It is performing like other phase detect systems, which is pretty impressive for what it is. I mean, there's no other cinema cameras that can do it other than the ones from Canon. Well, I guess the Sony now has it too, but I wouldn't really call those cinema.
They put the emphasis on the smoothness, right? So that you wouldn't see the jerking. It's more important for the red to gently move in and out than it is to snap to anything quickly, which is just a preference. On a Canon, you can set that as an option, but as a default, it's a better default because it works more. It's more useful more often. And I also wanted to touch on some of the things you were saying earlier about being in LA and seeing how much that red logo matters. I want to make sure nobody walks away thinking of that as like, oh, so the marketing has turned all these people into sheep and now they're just obsessed with the logo of red. And people see that in so many different ways. They see that with Apple, wherever they look, where there's something that's an expensive product and a lot of people buy it. They're like, oh, well, the marketing got to them. They are brainwashed.
And Tesla is like,
yeah,
that too.
Totally. You know what? My examples especially apply though to professional gear that is being used on a job. Having something that is an ecosystem that everybody else is using always means something, like with Apple, for example. I think it's frustrating to a lot of Android users to feel like they're marginalized. And I completely understand why. That, it would just be annoying to feel, snobbery from Apple users that it's like, oh, you're not using the same thing as me. Meh. Of course, that would be really annoying. Like I get it. But when you're in a working environment and I'm used to everyone else around me, like let's say we're on set, everyone else has an iPhone and we can all airdrop each other photos, and we do all the time. It's like reference material from scouting days or makeup examples or, contracts or whatever. Like airdrop is used just like, it's very casual. It's like, yeah, we're all just shooting each other's stuff. And then somebody's like, oh, I don't have that. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll throw it in Dropbox or I'll send you we figure it out. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, sure.
But when everybody's using the same thing, it just flows. So I would see that same thing with photography as well. Like if you've got, traditionally it's been if you had a Canon or a Nikon, now it's becoming Canon or a Sony. All your other friends have those lenses as well. And when you can, either borrow gear from people that you work with, or if you're on a set and there are multiple shooters and you're all using the same brand of stuff, or the client is just familiar with what you have, all of this stuff matters a lot. Like it doesn't matter at every level. So a great example is like a lot of the time, like event work, they're not going to care if you have a red, like, and even most of our jobs actually don't. A few of our clients would care. Most of our clients are like, no, as long as it looks good, whatever you think is best. But in certain worlds, it really, really does matter, and not for stupid reasons.
You couldn't have said it any better, really. It's all about the ecosystem. It's about the collaboration aspect of it. As a freelance DP, if you buy a camera like this red Komodo, it might land you some jobs, or rentals at the very least. I have a friend in Nashville who bought an Arri Alexa, and he was able to essentially pay it off after about 2 years of just renting it out. Mm-hmm. So, if you're fortunate enough to live in an industry town in your country, then buying a tool like that can really go far. Or if you're in some sort of niche, in my case, I was a wedding shooter for years. I would second shoot for several different guys in Nashville, and they were all Canon for the most part. So I owned 2 Canon cameras, a bunch of lenses, and I would show up and they'd be like, hey, can I borrow your 35 and your 50? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And it works, on their camera because it's the same camera. And so all this is a huge deal. Reds are used all over the place in commercial projects, on TV shows and films. And the fact that this one's so small and lightweight is going to be amazing. It can pretty much replace a GoPro in some circumstances. I wouldn't be surprised to see this being used, in future versions of carpool karaoke,
Yeah, for sure. No, this is going to get used a lot. And for anybody that thinks that this red thing is snobbish, just keep in mind, Alexa users are snobbish about red cameras. Like, it's the same one step up that, like, on other kinds of sets, if you don't have an Alexa, if you have a red instead, you're looked down on, and you're like, maybe we need to rent for this project because red's not enough. So, like, there's levels to this, and and again, even that stuff, that's not necessarily at all because the red can't produce the same image. Because I think it can. Like, I really think, like, the best reds and the best Alexas, they can match each other. They're both doing great. It's more so about, working environments and colorists being used to working in a certain way, things like that. So
the color science, if we're on that topic of the newest reds, is incredible. I don't know if you have any experience with the older MX sensors.
No,
I was involved in that world back when the original Red Epic came out, and got to shoot on a couple of those back in the old days when that first came out. And goodness gracious, the dynamic range and the color has just gotten so phenomenal with they call it the IPP2 color space. It's really great, even in kind of the baked in profile, if you want to call it that. I think they call it the wide color DR or something like that. I was actually using that in my video a lot, where I'm not even touching the log. I just adjust my raw exposure in post with the ISO and white balance, and then I just lock in this great color space that they've designed, and it just looks great out of the camera. The color science on this camera is really good.
That's a lot of what I really loved about it, is that to get the like the best colors, to make it just look right and look like a movie, all I had to do was kind of go through a few quick steps of the workflow, just make sure that you're doing your grades before the transform, you're converting it to the right log numbers, which I kind of forget what, like log D310 and RGB wide gamut, something like that. Convert it to the right things that give you the maximum amount of grading flexibility. And it just turns out, it just looks right. It looks great. And even with Canon, with the C200, Canon's LUTs look bad, like look wrong. I can't use them. They're terrible. So I use Alexa LUTs. And then for some reason that looks good. But why is that? Like, that's not how it should be at all, right? So
exactly.
It was really nice to have that simple of a workflow.
And again, even though it's raw video, because R3D has been around for so long, all of the NLEs support it so well. So Final Cut, Premiere, Resolve, Avid, if you're even on it, they all ingest the R3D really easily. And even in a 6K timeline on this computer, I didn't have to convert to to proxy. I was able to edit, in the lower resolution mode, the what do you call it? The better performance mode. It worked fine, and it was a little jumpy here and there because it is pretty big files, but
I had mixed results doing the raw in Final Cut on because I have a 2018 15-inch. Sometimes it was too much for it, and in the end, I just don't have enough storage with me to hold on to the raw, and also you can't shoot in low quality mode so far, so I transcoded them to ProRes. Like I did what I do with my C200 of, creating ProRes files and then worked from there. So you have to correct it first, make sure your white balance and your exposure are set correctly with the raw files, and then use those color corrected files, then add the transform to those and any color grading on top of that. So
yeah, it's a different workflow if you're not used to it, for sure, but it's not too hard, and there's a ton of documentation out there on it because Red has been around for a long time now. So
in what way does this camera make sense to buy? Okay, like let's talk about us now. Let's get into self-service of like why we're interested in these. First of all, okay, I'll just throw out that I did end up getting a hold of somebody at Red, and I am on the waiting list.
Great.
But I kind of think I might be on the waiting list for the waiting list. I don't know if I'm on the real waiting list yet.
Yeah.
And even that, it just means that they will, if one of the pre-release, because I really want the white one. The white one's so cool. So if one of the Stormtroopers becomes available, then I'll have an opportunity to buy it. But then, of course, it'll be released to public after that anyway. But
yeah, something that's fun, by the way, if you're not familiar, Red did do some limited run colors with this camera, and as of right now, those are the only ones we've actually seen. They are going to do an all black, like standard camera, and that's going to be the one that everybody's going to get. But there was like a neon orange one, a neon yellow, I think a pink one, or like a baby blue, and then a Stormtrooper white is what they called this last one. It's a lot of fun. Like, it's cool to see. Like, you don't see camera companies have fun with the products like this, which is awesome.
I just forgot to say this. I loved the construction. That it's just a completely metal, like hard metal box that I am sure you could just drop this from a couple of feet. Like, I'm sure you could. This could like hit concrete and keep going.
I'm sure they imagine that will happen on set. I'm sure, they designed that with that in mind. And with that, it is a fairly hefty box, but it's so small that it comes in at only 2 pounds with nothing on it. So it's still a very lightweight, sturdy box. And
it really reminds me of shooting a Hasselblad, which is my favorite format to shoot with. But does this make any sense for either of us, for especially, single person, 1 or 2 person teams, not big crews, so you don't have a lot of other people to help you operate or move gear around. Let's look at the big missing things here. If we're talking about either the R series from the Canons, and let's assume Canon somehow fixes overheating. Like, maybe they won't, but let's just pretend that's not an issue. And then also compare it to the A7S III, which is a pretty great competitor, and what Panasonic is doing, which I always forget that they're out there, and I know that they're doing great stuff. And like, needless to say, there are great things that these other companies are doing, and so is Blackmagic, and I'm forgetting to even mention that. God, there's so many cameras. Okay, I'm going to compare it to the A7S III. A7S III is the best example because it is much more affordable. Like, there's the biggest gap of like, you are giving up a lot if you choose the Red over the Sony.
It's true.
Let's list them real quick in our heads. You're going to lose great autofocus. Like, you'll have mediocre autofocus instead of great autofocus. You're going to lose full frame. You're going to lose
crazy low light.
Really, crazy low light. You're still going to get good low light, just not crazy low light. And what's the other one I was just thinking of? Slow motion. Good slow motion. There's not that many options.
You also lose the kind of modern conveniences of newer cameras with USB-C charging, a simple HDMI output that is readily available. It's only SDI out on this camera, which is a great connector, but it's much more professional and it's not as ubiquitous as HDMI.
Yeah, really long battery life off of very small batteries. Like, so in the Red world, this battery life is amazing. It's
it really is actually.
It's like more than twice as good as previous Reds, but compared to small cameras, it's terrible. So it depends how you frame it.
You also lose, an articulating screen like the one on the A7S III. It does have a screen built in, but it's on top, which makes it like a Hasselblad, which is kind of fun. But
yeah, it's fun. It's hard to pull focus from it. Like, I'm not sure how often it'll get used in real life.
But I will say there is a great solution to that. Small HD makes a really solid focus monitor that has USB plug-in or whatever to the camera. They'll actually enable touch focus, and you can actually touch the small HD and control the Red, which is really cool.
I think that is something you just should buy with it. Like, that is part of the price when you price out this Red. That small HD should be part of your package. It just totally makes sense. We're trying to use it with the Cine 7, so that's a 7-inch monitor, and it felt way too big. Like, this should have a 5-inch monitor on it, or an iPhone. You can totally mount an iPhone on top of this and just fully operate with an iPhone. It worked. It's amazing.
Well, you say that, but there was actually a plan in place from Red. It was called the Hydrogen.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's what this was supposed to be.
That was actually initially what the plan was, to use the Hydrogen with this camera, but that didn't work out so well.
Right. Well, hey, the iPhone works too. So,
Yeah, exactly.
and I wouldn't, if you're going to buy this, I wouldn't plan to make that. You have to have a real monitor as well. Don't trust wireless for everything. Like wireless is always flakier. So, have a real backup plan.
Did you? Was it
you
ever
just can't.
flaky for you though? Like I never had any dropouts. It seemed to be really amazing.
The only dropouts were with a little bit of distance,
Okay.
which doesn't take much, like 6 feet. It would start to be okay. It's a little choppy
Sure.
sometimes,
But if
close up, it was never close. Like within 3 or 4 feet, yeah,
if I were to put a phone mount on top of my camera and just leave it there,
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah.
and you really could do a lot with it.
But what else are you giving up? EVF. There's no built-in EVF.
Oh, yeah, right,
Weather
yeah.
sealing. There's no weather sealing on this type of camera. There's
Right.
holes all over the place, but that also allows it to cool properly without having overheating. There's no dual card slot of any kind.
Yeah, right. You don't have any redundancy. Bigger files, like there's no super compressed formats.
And you can't take, I mean, Red always kind of tries to say that it's a photography camera. I think there are some companies that, I think Vogue actually uses Red to take images of models where they just have a sequence of raw video that they pull
But it's
stills
not that
from, but
common.
it's not a stills camera. There's no IBIS either, no stabilization of any kind.
That's a
on
big
the
one.
sensor.
I forgot to say that.
But
Okay. You've done a great job of talking me out of it. So forget it. I'm going to stop thinking about this Red.
But no other cinema camera really has those things either. The closest thing would be what we mentioned earlier from Sony, the FX9, or the Canon C300 or C500, which have really kind of blended those worlds together in the cinema video production side with the things that, you know, these companies have learned with their hybrid cameras, like having good
And
autofocus, for example.
They
But-
also have internal ND.
yeah, and they have internal ND, which is huge. But you can get that great VND adapter thing that's RF to EF. I'm not a huge fan of VND, and I think a lot of cinematographers aren't either. There's always, no matter what you do, there's always a slight image degradation when you use two polarizers together. It just pulls the reflections out of people's skin tones, which I do not like. So I wish Canon would make some straight ND for that adapter. They still haven't, but
there are some higher end, I don't know, more expensive versions that are going to be just drop-in filters. I don't know what the plan is for EF adapters. I know the PL one is coming right away, where you can just drop in single NDs.
That's cool.
From
That's really
Kippertie. They're making the PL adapter that Frank was getting. So he's telling me all about it, and it looks great. Like that would be the professional solution to it. We just got to see that for EF, and it's not out yet. So, okay, but I mean, these are all great reasons not to get it. So why are we talking about this again?
Well, it comes down to image quality, man. Like I'm just sorry. When I pulled that image into my computer, and in my video, you can actually see a clear example of my A roll of me talking for the majority of the shot is like a standard mirrorless camera. It looks good. It's 4K 10-bit. You know, it does the job. And then there's like a cut, you know, where you see the red, and it's literally the exact same set, same lighting here in the Indie Mogul set. And the differences couldn't be more jarring. Like when it cuts to the red, and I didn't do anything special at all. I just used all the baked in like red profiles. It just has a cinematic power to the image that is, it's hard to put to words. It's just a feeling, I guess. There's a mojo to the image quality with the pairing of that global shutter and the red color science. It's just really good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I found even just monitoring it in the camera while we were shooting, like Anya commented while we were sitting in a restaurant looking, she's like, why does this look like, what's making it look like a movie right now? Is it the lens or is it the camera? And I'm like, yeah, it's just the camera just has that look that we've gotten used to as filmic and cinematic. So right away, yeah, it looks amazing. You can get that out of other cameras too. Like it's not that hard, but it was very refreshing to have it just be so easy and look so amazing. But so a lot of that thing of like, why would I be interested in a camera like this then that has all these, you know, a pretty long list of limitations we just talked about. It would be really nice to have something where the image quality just isn't making any more compromises. because I've always been in a situation where I'm like, oh yeah, my C200's really great, except the shadows can get really noisy if you do the wrong thing when you're exposing it. The magentas clip in certain situations, and so do the blues. And you can't use Canon's LUTs to transform it because they look crazy. So you have to use this weird workaround of using another brand's transform LUTs. And like, there's just this long list of like, oh yeah. Oh, and I can't preview the color that it's recording while I'm shooting. I'm sure I mentioned on this show a few times, but like it's not previewing C-Log 2. So the C200 in a lot of ways, it was like an amateur cine camera.
Yeah.
Like it didn't have enough of the pro. It had a bunch of pro features and just left out a bunch. So I was always kind of like crippled with it. And all these cameras are getting better and better, but this sort of fast tracks you to like, look, forget about all of that. You can stop thinking about your sensor. Your sensor is taken care of. Now it's how you light, and it's your lensing, and it's your choices. And you can
it's a
forget about
future-proof
the
camera. If you buy it at the level that you're at right now, you're gonna have it for a decade or more. I mean, you can just work around the camera at that point because you've arrived at that point where just straight out of the box, it's just so cinematic and there's no compromise. Like you said, the only compromise would be with frame rates. You have a little bit of limitation there. The maximum you can do in 6K is 40 frames per second. Once you start going into 4K, 2K, the way that Red does things is they crop in on the sensor. So that's the only, if you want to call it compromise, you're going to have. But if you're familiar with it
is a compromise.
But I'm coming from experience shooting on the Scarlett, the Red Epic, the Red One, the Raven. All of those cameras do this already. So I think a lot of people who are used to shooting on Reds, they're familiar with this. Like, this is how Red does things. And the reason they do it that way is because there's no compromise on the image quality. It's actually cropping in on the sensor at that resolution. So it's a 1-to-1 crop of the sensor in 4K and 2K and et cetera. That way they're not having to do any line skipping or throw away some detail and information. I wish that there was a switch that I could push to switch it to do maybe a line skip version for 6K 120. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I would take it. Yeah. Especially for 60 frames per second. Like, that will be frustrating. I'll have to, I feel like what you would still end up doing as the kind of shooters that we are, like, let's say a wedding shooter, or, you're shooting something that's like pretty run and gun, and you're still going to need to do things yourself. And sometimes you have to cut a few corners, is, find a cheaper camera that does some decent 60 or 120. And that becomes your slow motion camera.
And Red has a solution to this. They're going to say, hey, look, we sell other cameras. They're called the Epic and the DSMC2, system. They're $30,000. You can shoot 6K 120 on those, So, it is what it is. For YouTuber, though, I think you can work around that. I've been working around crops and all sorts of things like that for years. For the most part, I do shoot 24.
Yeah. Do you shoot slow motion?
I do.
Crops?
Yeah. I mean, with I'm just referring to the crops I was dealing with the EOS R when I was shooting on that primarily. I would constantly be switching between full frame and the 4K crop. And with the Nikon Z6, I was kind of messing around with that as well. Panasonic even has little crops here and there.
But it's like with things like, so wait, actually, let me do the math on this in my head. No, so I guess actually the R, here's the way to think about it. If you're used to shooting the R, which I'm shooting this right now for the video version, it crops to 1.7 or almost 1.8, I believe. That's probably getting close to what the 60 frames per second is cropping in.
It is, yeah.
On
and
the Komodo.
Once you get down to the 2K 120 mode, I've seen people talk about how you can actually use Super 16 lenses on a PL lens to do that, because you're getting into that realm. Yeah, so you can mount Super 16 lenses, I believe, on it. I need to do my own tests, but it's like a 2x crop or something.
Right.
And that's the problem that I found when I was going down to 2K. Even though they are doing a 1-to-1 on the sensor, that doesn't mean that there's like less noise because they're doing that. Like the noise is more prevalent when you go down to the lower resolutions. Man, we're kind of underselling it at this point, aren't we, Tyler? Sorry.
Yeah, no, we really brought it down. I mean, we were all hyped up at the beginning. It should have ended this in the opposite direction. But no, I mean, these are very real concerns. Like, I don't think our goal isn't a camera, or relative.
Well, sort of.
Yeah, maybe it is, but because okay. Other things I do like. I do want to say RF mount was a stroke of genius that I didn't realize until I was using it because of how many things it means you can adapt to it. It really means you can put like any lens on there, which I hadn't thought about. I was like, well, I don't even have any RF lenses, or very few. Why do I care? The point is mirrorless short flange lenses like that can easily be changed into virtually anything. So it was either going to be Canon, Sony, or the M system, which Canon was the obvious choice. So
now this is my own kind of conspiracy theory here. There's an RF mount on the camera. There's Canon batteries on the back. And when you take the R5 sensor and crop out a 6K resolution of it, it's the exact same megapixels as an R5. Is this a Canon collaboration thing going on here with Red and Canon? I don't know.
Right.
It's a conspiracy.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely talked.
They had to talk. They had to talk to get the RF.
I'm sure. Yeah. There's conversations.
Yeah. I don't think that, it's the same sensor or anything. I'm not saying that by any means, but it is interesting that they're going with a lot of Canon stuff. The batteries on the back are using the old C300 batteries, not the new. I was mistaken. I thought it was going to be like the C500, C200 batteries. It's actually the original C100 and the C300 batteries on the back.
Oh, I didn't check that. So it's not
the ones that you have.
That's really weird. So it's not the ones I have.
You're going to have to buy the old C300 batte're Yeah.
Okay. That doesn't make any sense at all. But
maybe it's a licensing thing, or they're trying to keep the costs down because obviously the newer batteries are more expensive. I don't know. But because of that reason, they're sold out everywhere. Like everybody that's buying this camera is buying up all the old C300 batteries. I heard that Red actually bought like a ton of them from Canon, so that might be why they're out of stock everywhere, because I think they're going to be bundling them with the camera when they start shipping production versions of it. But you can actually charge the batteries through the camera, which is cool. You don't have to have a charger of any kind. You can also hot swap them as well. So if one is dead, the other one is powering it. You can just take the one that's dead off while you're recording and put a new one on. So you can, in theory, constantly be powering the camera over battery, which is great. Really well designed there.
I'll add one more thing to try to finish on a high note as well. That this means more than it'll sound like, but it feels really, really good to shoot on. It feels amazing in your hand. The usability, the design is very smart. It feels like a camera that's going to last you as long as you want to keep shooting with it. And I think it's actually pretty attractive. Like it's nicely designed. It's very simple, but it's relatively beautiful. And I'm really kind of sick of the fact that all my Canons and Sonys are just ugly. Like there's nothing beautiful about that. Like there's nothing interesting. Like
That's what Fuji does blobs, so well. I love the Fuji design.
Yes, completely. And same thing. I feel that with Fuji too. When I'm shooting with it, I'm like, this just feels great. It's also that difference between shooting with Sony and Canon that is so hard to explain often. It's also great to shoot with the Canon compared to a Sony. And Sony users are always like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, okay, the menus aren't great, but you can customize all the buttons. I'm like, you obviously don't understand. Like, you don't have to you shouldn't need to customize the buttons. Like, that is only a sign of non-design and lack of thought.
Here's the thing, man. A lot of people lose sight of this when we get into the tech specs. Photography and filmmaking is an art. It's an art form, and the tool that we use can inspire us to create and inspire us to create things that we weren't even thinking of creating because of the tool itself. Right when we started this conversation, you mentioned it reminded you of a Hasselblad. And I've heard Jared say the same thing about it. The fact that the screen is on top, you can just get a nice little side handle and potentially even like a little hood that can go over your screen so that you can kind of just look down like you would an old Hasselblad. It creates a style and a way of shooting that is reminiscent of that older style. And it's so unique. There's no cameras like it other than the digital Bolex, which I used to shoot on. I only mention that because I shot a lot of projects with that camera. It had a top mounted screen just like the Komodo. It was a global shutter just like the Red Komodo, and it had that same motion cadence that I really love. So the Komodo is really a combination of all the things that I personally, as a filmmaker, am inspired by. And I think Leica and Hasselblad get the same kind of respect in the photography world as just being inspiring tools made by creators. And that's what I feel when I hold and use the Red, is it's inspiring. And you can't really put that on paper. And it definitely sounds pretentious when I say it out loud, but there is some truth to that, I think.
Yeah, it's real. And it's similar. It reminds me of the feeling of shooting film. I'm really used to shooting digital. I'm never going back to film for work. But when you take the photos, first using most film cameras, they physically feel better in the hand. And then the way that negatives come out as they're being processed, like just the depth of color and luminance information that is inside of a negative, feels great to play with afterwards. Like it's really, there's a lot of substance to it. And you get it when you get a similar feeling out of digital footage, that, again, it inspires the image. I feel more inspired and excited shooting on my C200 than on the R. And again, I felt much more inspired shooting on the Komodo than on the C200. So,
and there's also real people behind this that you can actually talk to on forums. I mean, the Red engineers and Jared himself are very active on Red user forums and on Instagram. I think that's something that's really interesting for a company to have such a public kind of conversation with their users that you just don't see anywhere else. I'm also a guitar player, and a lot of people might not know that about myself, but John Mayer just did a whole new design guitar with Paul Reed Smith, which is a pretty well-known guitar brand. He was working with Fender, and I saw an interview with him, and they said, why did you switch from Fender, who you've been using Stratocasters for years? Why would you switch to Paul Reed Smith? He said, I switched to Paul Reed Smith because the guy whose name is on the guitar, I can pick up the phone and talk to. And he said the power of being able to call the guy with the name of the guitar, whereas on Fender, I had to talk to a PR person, then talk to somebody's assistant that then went to the CEO, and the CEO didn't know anything. And he had to, the fact that Red is made by filmmakers here in Hollywood with real people on the ground, that you can be active in the Facebook groups, you can be active on the forums. If you have any issues, bugs, with it, they're actively changing the software. It's still in beta, and they're continuing to upgrade things. It's cool that the company is that open and kind of public for you to access. There's really no camera companies like that.
Absolutely. No, I think they're doing great work. And I never thought I'd be talking about Red so much on this podcast. But
of course,
thanks for coming on to do it, Dave. Where can people find you if they're looking for your
so definitely
work
check me out on Indie Mogul on YouTube. Just search Indie Mogul. It's spelled INDYMOGUL. And my handle on Twitter is @Dave Maze. That's where you can find most of my internet annoyances. That's where Tyler and I complain about things and discuss a lot of camera news and tech. So go follow me on Twitter if you're one of those people. So come on, let's do it. Twitter all the way.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tyler.